The lighting never really favors me. I guess it's just, the consequence of not having resources. But anyway, welcome to today's episode. I don't even know what this is. It's just me talking, me sharing my ideas and the things I think about. I hope I'm audible. Thank you guys for tuning in. However, many of you, all three of you, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate that there's some people who listen to what I have to say. I don't know where today's episode is going, where today's rant is going, but I've just been thinking, because every time I talk to people, well, not every time, but whenever I get the chance, I talk to people. And as I talk to people, as I teach, as I learn as well. I figure things out, or I come up with ideas that I believe need critiquing. But then I can't keep them to myself, because how else then are they going to be critiqued? But then I think the most important thing is that once I share them, people can then expand on them, or they can then experiment with them or implement them, if maybe I cannot, or if maybe I'm not in a position that I can do that. Or perhaps someone can listen to it, and that could plant a better iteration of a better version of the idea that I have, or whatever the case may be. One thing that seems to be a prevalent result that I've seen in community, and that I've seen that other people have noticed as well, is how the issues that we sort of complain about, and mainly corruption, corruption in South Africa in particular, all of that has come to now be a culture. What I mean is that it's not something that you only find in the higher ups, in people who have access in like the presidency level, or lower than that, or just lower than that, and so on and so on. It's now something that you find be prevalent everywhere. And I think it is something that has trickled down from the top. But then people underneath notice that, we are now getting money that's missing, or they were able to peek behind the curtain and notice that things are being stolen up there. And then they were like, wow, since we can't do anything about them, let us also get our piece. And then everyone beneath that did that. To a point where now I was having a conversation with a person now who agreed that, hey, you realize that your 10-year-old child understands that you need to have money ready, so that if policewoman stops you for something, you have some money to give them. And yeah, of course, maybe don't be an offender, maybe whatever, but then there are certain things, like maybe your windscreen is cracked, and maybe you're still gonna fix that, or there's a lot of potholes, a lot of debris on roads, so windscreens are always getting cracked. I have two chips that I got in one day on this car I'm in. So it's things that happen, and you know that, okay, maybe if I have a crack right in front of me, I'm gonna get a ticket, but I don't want to get a ticket. I'm gonna get this fixed probably at the end of the month, or 2 months from now, because again, budgets are tight. So your kid sort of understands that that's what needs to happen. So he or she grows up in a world where bribery, which is a form of corruption, is normal. That's a normal thing. It's normalized. So obviously this kid grows up with that mentality of bribery being just everyday normal culture. And it's a thing, when they grow up, that's now the type of leaders, that's interesting, the type of leaders, the type of community members, the type of society members that we are going to have, people who think and really believe that, bribery is natural, it's normal, because that's what they grew up in. And I think you see this now because throughout so many years, these things have been happening, they've been trickling down to a point where it's become so normal. It's because maybe I was a good cop, but then 10 years of seeing everyone around me being able to do things for their mothers, do things for their wives, do things for themselves, I'm like, why on earth am I being a good citizen? Why should I be the one suffering? These guys are doing this dirty stuff, and none of them are getting caught. None of them have to account for anything. Yeah, sure, maybe there's 1 or 2, 5 people who get in trouble for that, but for the most part, people are getting away with it. So why am I suffering? Excuse me. This also then I think maybe obviously, but let me not say obviously. I actually don't like when people use the word obviously, because it preempts that the next person understands what you're about to say next. And most cases I found, perhaps it's just the people who say it to me, they're like, obviously this. I'm like, that is not obvious. That is not the the right word to use there. So I was about to use that word because I thought maybe this is an obvious result, but I think, okay, maybe it's not obvious. But I may have lost my train of thought, but anyway, I'm just gonna get back to it. The end results become, what was I saying? Christ. What we then find ourselves in is a situation in which society is like that. And the result of those things become things like crime. Crime increases because as much as we go to realize that there is no consequence for crime, we then really have no deterrent towards crime. We're like, okay, well, it's a vocation. It's an available vocation that I can go for. I mean, I can't get a job, I can't get skills, I can't get this and this and this, and I can't provide for my family. But here's an option that also exists, and it's probably even has a better return on investment than maybe being in college or university for 4 to 3 to 4 years. So then that becomes an option that people take on. And then what that does is then again, you know, police have to be even more corrupt so that these guys are able to do what they do. And if they get caught, they have the police to help them get out, or maybe to not even get caught in the first place. And it's a whole cycle. And again, people growing up in this come to see that as a culture, which already is a culture even now, but then it's going to perpetuate and perhaps even expand because people who are growing up here are seeing that as the culture, and they're learning, they're looking and they're learning and they're accepting that to be the case. I've spoken to high school kids, and I've heard these kids the other day, these young girls in a high school were having this conversation so passionately, and I wasn't even part of the conversation, but I heard them speaking about it, and I went to go join them, and they were talking about how hard they already envision life being, because they can already see that it's difficult to get a license unless you pay exorbitant amounts of money just to get a license, driver's license, that is. And then these things are even worse when you start looking for a job, because then in order to get a job, you need to know someone or pay someone for you to get a job. And these are teenage girls who are not so hopeful about the future because that's how they envision the future is. And then, a few years down the line, we'll be trash talking certain girls or whatever, saying, yeah, they had to sleep their way to the top and blah blah blah. And of course, there's a lot of women who get to where they get without having to sleeping their way through. But at the same time, the environment kinda is like that, where maybe you're good enough or maybe just good enough, but then someone is just gonna be there who's gonna wanna block you and prevent you from just getting through, because they can sort of tweak your results, not be good enough so that they can take advantage of you. And these are things that we see happening all over. And again, they sort of become a norm that maybe we might shun upon it, but then some people might look at like, hey, it's the only way I can get ahead. Now I'm going to have to sleep my way to the top. And even if it's not to the top, but I had to sleep myself to survival. And these things are becoming a culture. And I, for one, am not happy about that. And I think you may have noticed by now that the key word of of this episode is culture. And I think that is what I want to focus on, or maybe I want to speak on, or at least I want to advise on, or at least plant a seed on, or plant a seed of an idea on. And the idea is leaders, and I'm not talking about the leaders that we currently have in our political parties and wherever. I'm talking about leaders that actually want to do stuff, to change stuff, people that have influence, people that have ideas, that want to do things. I think that one of the things you might want to incorporate in your master plan, in your implementation plan, in your strategy is culture. How do you build a different and a new, progressive, and sustainable culture. That sustainable word almost got away from me. I caught it just before it left me. And sustainable culture. Because, the moment something becomes a culture, it becomes second nature. You don't even have to think about it. It's like it's right there, like you see a cop, you're driving and you see a cop, you already know you have an issue. Maybe your brake light isn't working, your headlight isn't fine, something. You already know that I must have some money in the car so that I can give this guy. That's second nature. I already know, you jump to that already. And I think that that is what we need. I've been questioned by a lot of people when I got to Joburg, even years after I was in Joburg. For me, it's a culture. You see someone in the street, you greet them. And there's been some people who've commented on that, like, you greet a lot, you greet people. I'm like, well, that's culture. That's just what you do. Maybe I didn't use the word culture, but to me, it's second nature. You see a human being passing, you pass them, you greet them. To me, that's how I grew up. That's what I know. It really, to this day, it still frustrates me when person comes and passes me and doesn't greet me. And yes, a lot of times I don't greet as well. But that's because that's the culture that has developed, especially in a place like Gauteng. Go back to Mpumalanga, where I come from, you still get a lot of people greeting, you still greet a lot of people. It's still something that happens there. But I'm just saying, something like that, a very small thing, but being able to smile, to greet someone, to consider someone's existence. A very small thing, again, but a very important thing. Because it makes you acknowledge, that's the word I was looking for earlier, acknowledge. It makes you acknowledge the existence of the other person. And then it lets you acknowledge their potential needs and the potential struggles and the potential let's just cut it there. Potential struggles. And then you can potentially relate to that person. And then you can potentially be willing to work with that person. And it's said a lot that you don't greet a person and then 2 seconds later or 2 minutes later, they need your help. But then, like, or maybe you need their help. You don't greet me. You just pass me like I'm nothing. And now because you need my help, you start acknowledging that I exist. Again, it's a small thing. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's something that we need to bring back into the culture of human beings. And mind you, I'm not even mentioning any race here. I'm just saying human beings. Because when I pass a person, I see that person, hey, how are you doing? You good? Yeah, fine, great. Let me keep moving. If something is to happen to me, to them, we've sort of related in a way. We've shared a smile that sort of connected us, like, hey, you're a human, I'm human. If you need any help, if something happens, I'm here. I don't know you. I don't really give much of a hoot, really. But if something does go on that requires you to need the aid of another human being, I'm here. I've acknowledged that you're a human being. You've acknowledged that I'm a human being. Maybe you need some help. Talk to me. Let's figure this out. And I think that that is the one of the very important things that we need to incorporate into our plans as leaders. And this is even in business leaders. If you look at some of the businesses, the big businesses, not just in South Africa, but internationally, look at some of the big famous businesses that we know about. You'll hear about the certain culture that exists in this business, and this is the culture that they have, and this is how they live, and so on and so on. And this is how they do it. That culture, it's not quantifiable, it's not tangible, but it is an essential part of the strategy, the business implementation that exists there. And it goes a long way. It goes a long way. And I think that is a very important thing that we should not just think is going to manifest itself. However, it's something that we should deliberately, consciously work on building within our implementations, within our missions, within our strategy. I feel like mission was supposed to be a different word, but it's okay. Within our strategy, in order for us to build sustainable solutions. Because the culture, you can take away so many things, but once the culture is there, that remains, that is deeply embedded in people. And right now, we're struggling a lot with the things we're struggling with. People, is this going to help? not so much. People want to get into certain positions for reasons that do not serve the general community. It's because of the culture that has been built, and it's hard to get that out. But if we set out to change that culture for the coming 10, 20, 30 years, then 30 years down the line, we might then see a universal, and by universal I don't mean the whole universe. I actually mean national, but universal is a better word to use in this case. We might just see a universal transformation, a universal shift in the behaviors, in the ambitions, in the relations of people within the country. And hopefully that then helps us implement the other things that we want to do, perhaps the more physical, tangible, quantifiable aspects of our strategies, because there's a certain culture that we're building, and that becomes then the South African culture. And this is how South Africans can move forward, because the leaders have ensured that these cultures, if anything else, let the culture be the thing that you're pushing forward. There are certain examples that I can bring into this to try and show what I'm talking about, but I think that the examples, they might cause a stir. So I'm just trying to be neutral here, just to think about yourself, think about where you come from. A lot of people who I've spoken to who come from Emakaya, come from the rural areas, come from places that aren't quite rural, but they're not like the big cities like Joburg and Pretoria. And to them, this thing is also true. To a lot of people, not knowing your neighbor is a foreign idea. And this is not just black people. I've heard this from black people, white people, Indian people, and all of them are like, bruh, I don't know my neighbor. My neighbor doesn't know me. We can't talk, we can't relate, we don't know each other. And that is a thing that has now become a culture, and I think that we should deliberately change that and create a new culture, a different culture for South Africans. And maybe the cultures that different organizations, different areas, different movements, the culture that they develop maybe may not synchronize. But I think that eventually, by the time we get to a certain point as a country, there will be emerging convergence. I think that's the word, a convergence of a lot of these cultures. And I think that will help take the country into a good direction. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you've tuned in this long, I really appreciate it. I hope that I've added value. I hope that I was audible. And if I'm not, please just let me know. Sometimes I feel like I mumble my words, even though when I've asked people, they're like, "No, you sound good. We can hear you. You're audible." But I'm not sure about it. But then I know I'm not doing this for me mainly. I'm doing it for people to learn, to question, to start having conversations, and to help make this country a better place, because that's what I'm all about. But I don't know much of what I'm talking about. So please go and try and figure these things out and ask other people. Maybe they know better than I do.